A controversial position taken by those who collect blood. Canada Blood Services, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration weighing in, has been whether or not to collect blood from gay males. This, of course, started when we first learned of HIV/AIDS and people were being infected with the disease through blood transfusions. Of course, now a lot more attention is paid to the supply, looking for those particular diseases before blood is passed on. And it would seem an excellent job is being done by those who collect and disseminate the blood in that regard. But they have just decided that they would forego the expense of collecting from gay males. Now the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has said that they will ease up somewhat and allow men who've had sex with men to donate if 1 year has passed since their last sexual experience or contact. Canada Blood Services has not decided to follow their lead. They're not saying they won't in the future, but still only allowing men who've had sex with men to donate blood after 5 years has passed. JJ McCullough joins me now. JJ, welcome.
Thank you.
Is Canada Blood Services dragging its feet, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, this is a very personal issue to me on some level because I myself am a gay male. I could not give blood under the current sort of guidelines. But the problem is that I think a lot of gay men who interact with this policy sort of do not analyze it from a sort of strictly scientific perspective. They view it strictly from a matter of validation of their identity, of their lifestyle, which I don't think is what is motivating this policy. I mean, this is a policy that is based on doing what, statistically speaking, is the safest thing to do to ensure that the blood pool, so to speak, is as untainted as possible or is meets the highest standards of safety. So I do think that it's problematic when people only want to engage with this as a kind of human rights issue, as a kind of issue of validation of you know, the sort of the homosexual experience, when I really don't think that's what it's about at all. I mean, the fact is that you cannot give blood in this country if you, for instance, weigh less than 100 pounds. That's considered to be a high-risk indicator for whatever reason. You cannot give blood in this country if you've spent too much time in a part of the world that is considered disease-prone. So, for instance, I have a friend who spent the first 20 years of his life in sub-Saharan Africa. He is not allowed to give blood for the similar reason. I mean, it's not because, you know, that there's some sort of racist conspiracy any more than I believe that there's a homophobic conspiracy. It's just they're choosing to really err on the side of an abundance of caution, which I don't necessarily think is indefensible.
Well, I've had periods of time where I could not donate blood for the reasons that you've brought up, JJ, and it's because of countries that I travel to. So I'm just off the list for a while, and I understand it. And to back up some of what you're talking about in the science on this, we found some numbers today from the Centers for Disease Control in the United States. Where do the new incidents of HIV come from in the United States? White men having sex with men, black men having sex with men, Hispanic men having sex with men, and then it breaks down into other categories. This is not being done by the Centers for Disease Control, JJ, on a value judgment. They're just saying that's the science.
No, and I know, and we know scientifically that ever since HIV/AIDS has been a pandemic in this part of the world, we do know that gay men are disproportionately affected by it and disproportionately carriers of it. And I mean, that is a very unfortunate reality. I mean, it has been dubbed the gay plague, and there is truth to that. But at the same time, I mean, it does fall on gay men to be sexually responsible, but unfortunately to also carry the burden that a lot of the more irresponsible gay men have inflicted upon this community, which is that, you know, there's been a lot of promiscuous gay men who have not taken sufficient precautions when they're having sex with other men, and that they have become carriers of the disease. And I suppose you could also say that there's a lot of gay men who are just not accurately keeping track of who they're having sex with and are thus maybe carriers of the disease without even knowing it. And it's that pool that the blood services are trying to avoid. It's not necessarily that they believe that all gay men are liars that say that they're HIV free when actually they are carriers, but just that they might not know, and that some gay men are just frankly so promiscuous that they haven't been keeping track of their partners or they haven't been sufficiently tested. And this, unfortunately, being the reality of the gay male experience in a lot of cases, that they're choosing to, again, side with an abundance of caution in the same way that they side with an abundance of caution when it comes to people that have traveled to certain, you know, quote unquote dangerous parts of the world, or people that are underweight, or people that, you know, have chronic fatigue syndrome or various other variables.
Well, there certainly are gay males who have long-term committed relationships, and if neither of them has AIDS, as with any other couple, they're not going to get it. Should we be moving toward a system where, should those individuals wish to be blood donors, there's some way for them to come into the system?
Yes, and I mean, that is where I do think that the criticism is most justified, because when it comes to a lot of these other sort of variables that I've raised, the blood services people do tend to have sort of extenuating circumstances in which they will allow it, so that there are certain criteria that you meet. You know, if you've traveled to a dangerous part of the world, but you know you've been safe or you've been cleared for X number of years, well then you know you're given a waiver and you're allowed to donate. I do think that when gay men make some of these criticisms, they're basically asking to be held to the same standards. So they're basically asking for there not to just be this blanket ban, but for there perhaps to be an abundance of caution, but also a way that you could opt in necessarily a way that doesn't necessarily require you to have to be celibate for 5 years, which is basically what the Canadian Blood Services is asking right now, which might be an unrealistic barrier. Whereas if they said that, well, if you can, like, for example, provide a certificate that shows that you've been tested and that you've been cleared, which is something that a lot of responsible gay men do on the regular, I mean, that doesn't seem irresponsible to me. I mean, you have to give, I think, some sort of grounds in which to, for men that are so dedicated about donating blood, a way to prove that they are not in fact at a risk. I mean, at the same time, you can understand how perhaps it's irresponsible to ask the Canadian Blood Services to front all the bills for all of this kind of testing, but I think that if certain responsible gay men take it upon themselves because they feel so passionately about this, I do think that their claim should be taken seriously if they have evidence to support it.
All right.